What would you say to your 12-year-old self? This simple yet profound question has sent me on a journey back to childhood to find healing for today. I'm Mike Nicholson, a lifelong educator with over 25 years devoted to young minds. I'm here to celebrate those dedicated to the service of young people and to delve into how they navigate their personal healing amidst the childhood pain they witness in their daily lives. Together, we forge actionable steps to kickstart the healing journey for the young people of today. Join me as I speak with teachers, mental health professionals, coaches, and more, and uncover the wisdom they would share with their 12-year-old selves. Together, we strive to build a foundation for healing that many of us never had. So what would you say to your 12-year-old self? A special note before starting, this podcast is in no way intended to take the place of any kind of mental health assistance. We are simply having discussions about healing and learning and growing. If you need mental health attention, please seek a professional. This episode contains conversations about suicide and sexual abuse. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Your 12-Year-Old Self. Today, my guest is Ana Gersch. Anna's a trauma coach, a mom, a wife, and a former 12-year-old. Her work around trauma helps her clients make sense of their past experiences and how it impacts their daily lives today. She helps navigate triggers with her clients, which in turn helps calm the nervous system. When I first invited Ana on the show, she hesitated because she doesn't work with young people, which is much of the target of this show. But I had been consuming her social media content, and I was intrigued by her insights on trauma in adults. She's such a well-rounded person and brings such richness and experience to her work. So we spend some time talking about identity, about compassion versus empathy, and there's even a few moments of vulnerability on my part where I feel like kind of like I'm her client. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So please welcome Ana Gersch. Oh. Ana Gersch, thank you for coming on Your 12-Year-Old Self. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I'm going to start the session like I do every one and ask you, paint a picture of your life at 12 years old for us.
Wow. Okay. I am working at my mom's salon. She just opened up her salon, and she's the only one there. We live above the salon, so I am free labor. And after school, up until 7:30, 8 o'clock, I am there, and then I go upstairs and start my homework, do my chores, and then go to sleep and then do it all over again. She was open 7 days a week when she first opened. No, I'm sorry. She was closed on Sundays, but that was when we did the major house cleaning, so it wasn't a day off for me. So that was pretty much my life at 12 years old. Might be a trigger warning for some of your viewers. I was also molested when I was 12. So there was a lot of trauma happening inside my body, but nobody knew externally. I didn't tell my mom or anybody until I was much, much older. So there was a lot of internal conflict happening. There was a lot of emotional turmoil. And that kind of set the stage for my teenage years being very rebellious. And so that was kind of my 12-year-old self.
Interesting. And I'm sorry to hear that. And I'm sure you've worked very hard on on coping. Was this in Chicago as well, where you live now?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have one other question. Is it something that was repeated, the abuse, or was it just a one-time thing?
Mm-hmm. It was a one-time thing, and it was by a close family member. And so I just avoided the house. I just didn't. If my parents went over, I just said I was sick or I didn't want to go. I was old enough to make that decision of not of staying back. I would just say I had homework or whatever. Still had to see them at like bigger events, birthday parties or weddings and stuff like that. But at that point, it was, there was enough people around where I didn't feel in danger. So
Okay.
that's kind of how I made it through. And then I was old enough in high school just to kind of not go to the weddings and not go to the birthday parties as well.
Right. So speaking of high school, my lens that this is all framed in is that of a school administrator.
Hmm.
I worked in public schools for a long time, and I
God
worked
bless you.
with. Yeah, I retired a couple years ago early because it was hard, and
Yeah.
but that also set me on this little journey that we'll get into too. But so I'm always thinking about that child in front of me. So I
Mm.
worked in a middle school, which is like a seventh and eighth grade, and in high schools, here's clearly 9 through 12. So what were those years like for you? Your high school years, especially, were you say you're rebellious? Were you getting in trouble a lot? Were you drinking, doing
No.
drugs? Like, what was
So,
rebellious?
yeah, so I'm Albanian. Rebellious in Albanian culture is very different. I had a boyfriend that was rebellious. I didn't do what my parents told me to do. I, you know, I'd never snuck out because unfortunately my parents had cameras because my mom's salon was here and we lived above in an apartment. So, like, they had cameras because of the salon. So, like, I never snuck out, but it was something that I contemplated all the time. And so my rebellious probably looks a lot different than somebody else's rebellion, but it was rebellious in the context of my family.
Got it.
And yeah, it was a lot of struggle explaining trying to have to explain who I was or why I was so stubborn or why I didn't want to do things the way that they told me to do. And so it was a lot of just back and forth arguing and but now being a mother, I know why. You're trying to establish your own identity. You're trying to step back from this uh child self into this new role of a young adult, and that's just normal. It happens. There's hormones. But it just felt like more of a struggle than it needed to be.
So you just mentioned identity, which is one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about because I noticed that a few times in your content, um, you reference how important identity is.
Hmm.
And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit because I was very curious about it.
Yeah, well, I think that we're always forming our identity as, your identity is not something that is concrete. Your identity changes from a teenager to a young adult to an adult to a mother to, grandmother. But the core of identity is our true self. It's kind of this link to the divine or link to something above yourself. And the reason why this is the way I view it, by the way, this is totally my opinion. Um, the reason why you have to kind of take your identity to something higher is because when we associate identity with external values, what I do, what I own, what I look like, it becomes very fleeting and it becomes something that is always, you're always grasping for more. When we align our identity with a higher power, a higher good, a God, a universe, whatever you believe in,
A
we have
purpose. Is that what you're talking about? A
exactly a
purpose?
purpose, right? We can step back and almost take those external things and make them into tools, not to cling on to them as who we are, you know?
Love this conversation only because um I first of all, can we just talk about what you do? Because I think
Yes.
if anyone's listening right now, we're talking about how you go about this idea of identity, but talk about what you do, your business and your coaching and things like that.
So I'm a trauma coach. I deal with mostly trying to help people figure out their triggers. Triggers and trauma kind of go hand in hand. If you have a trigger, there's most likely a trauma associated to that trigger. I help kind of identify what those triggers are, and then I kind of help clients work through the trauma that is associated with it. It's kind of like a root of a tree, it doesn't necessarily have one source, but usually it comes from childhood. Unless you've had like a shock trauma, like car accident or plane crash. That was an interesting one. But usually it stems from developmental traumas that have happened throughout our development. And that's kind of what I help clients do. And we work through visualizations, we use meditation, we use many different modalities. My background is in yogic culture. I spent 3 years with my husband in India. My husband spent 10 years back and forth in India. So very much into the yogic culture. And so I use a lot of modalities from Buddhism and even Christianity and Islam. I pull a lot from religion, not necessarily religion based though, but I do feel, like I said, that you need to have a higher purpose, whatever that is. There are a lot of people who do come from religious abuse. And so, they don't want to deal with that. They don't want to associate with a higher power. So we try and work through differentiating the abuse that happened and the trauma that happened, and God has nothing to do, the two have nothing to do with each other. So it's very complicated, and each person is different and each approach is different. So I can't say that I use one modality versus another. Everything is so personalized.
Right. It's interesting. So I never thought of this idea of triggers. I have thought of because I spent my later part of my adult life finding them in myself, right? Or figuring them out. Took a long time, a lot of pain, a lot of poor choices, things like that. And thankfully, I'm at a point where I have my purpose, and I'm trying now to give back. But it's amazing how long it took for me without it, because I didn't have a coach. I never even thought of having a trauma coach.
Yeah.
A couple things. So you mentioned you do this kind of work, and one of the things that you have to use, I'm certain, is compassion.
Yeah.
Because clearly it's what you do. Because I'm very curious about another thing that's very prominent in your content is empathy versus compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And it hit me when I was looking through your content. Again, as much as I'm healing, and I've been healing for a long time, and I'm still on this journey, I'm so new to it. And this idea of empathy versus compassion,
Yes.
I would love to hear you talk about it more, because what led me here is my years of working with young people. I had a very close proximity to pain, is what I would tell people, more than most. In a vice principal's office or a principal's office in a middle school, the stuff we saw on a daily basis was devastating.
I'm sure.
And what I'm realizing now, and I was always very empathetic, and I was probably the most guidance counselor like disciplinarian ever, because I was always so concerned about the child and their well-being. But I'm realizing now, and what I'm kind of navigating through now, is how much that affected me.
Yeah.
How much did all of that? Because now that I'm out, I'm reflecting, and I'm thinking about my own childhood trauma, and I'm realizing how much of that was me projecting, and how much of that was my empathy not the right thing to use at that time? Should I have thought compassion, that kind of stuff? So can you just talk about that for just a second?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite topics to talk about, because a lot of people say that you have to be empathetic, or, you have to use empathy, or I'm going to teach my child to be empathetic. And there is a really big difference between being empathetic and being compassionate. Being sympathetic is very different. This is also a concept in Buddhism. When we're compassionate, we can see the situation for what it is. If we can offer help, but there's a separation between our nervous system and the other person's nervous system. When we're empathetic, sometimes our emotions can get enmeshed. And what that means is we take on the person's suffering. And then we also suffer, right? My guru in India would always say that two beggars don't make a better world. And what he meant by that was if you see a beggar on the street every day and you give him money and you give him money and you give him money, right? Because you're empathetic, you're going to run out of money, right?
And become a
And one
beggar
day
yourself. Yes. Yeah.
you might become a beggar yourself. So that's what you do when you give out all of this emotional energy and you drain it in order to seriously help. What we do is we take on, and I'm guilty of this because when somebody tells me a very traumatic story, I'm picturing that story in my mind. My nervous system is going through it as the person's telling me it, right? Because if I tell you close your eyes and picture a cardinal sitting on a tree, your nervous system doesn't know the difference, right? It thinks that you're there looking at the cardinal
Right.
on the tree. So when we go through this wave of empathy, we drain ourselves of the actual energy to help. And that's because we're engulfed in the sadness, we're engulfed in the depression, we're engulfed in the suffering of the other. Instead of separating yourself, having compassion, and looking at the situation from a lens of what can I truly do to help, right? Because sometimes that beggar doesn't need money, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that beggar might just need somebody to listen to. Sometimes that beggar might need food. Sometimes he might need clothes. And sometimes, here's where compassion comes in, they might need drugs, right? And that's really hard for people to kind of grasp, is like, whoa, am I being compassionate by offering something that's detrimental, to that person? You're giving him money.
Interesting.
How do we know what
Interesting.
he's going to be doing with that money? So,
So amazing. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
no, that's pretty much the gist of it.
It's so. I have so many thoughts right now, and it's mainly because, no joke, I believed empathy was above all for even until this moment, to the point where I have a 5-year-old, and my wife and I are both in education. She's a teacher, and I'm a retired administrator. And we came up with, there was 4 values we raise our child with, right? So we came with a little vision statement, and it was called BAKE, right? Boldness, adaptability, kindness, empathy. And because those were things that we thought were important. And I'm not second guessing that, you know what I mean? But I now know I need to work on that, because the other thought that I have is I worked in education for so long, and I watched so many teachers and people and staff members get so burnt out and internalize everything that happened to a child. Mainly their failures, not so much their successes.
Right.
And nurses, I guess I see that a lot, and these people, and it leads to this kind of like cycle of sacrifice I always talk about, but like, and I'm realizing early on in my life, my empathy was really devastating. Like I really struggled to talk to young people, because they would come to me and give me this happened, that happened, and I guess I learned to build a little bit of to be able to succeed more. A little bit of a wall for myself to. I was still compassionate, but it was, again, I still think, looking back, it had an effect on me. Like 100%. How many parents sat in my office who were neglectful, like my family was. What did that do to me? And I'm not trying to play a victim or anything else. This is just the kind of journey I'm on. I'm trying to,
Mhm.
this is what starts this whole thing. So
Right.
many of us work with these young people and
Mhm.
we try to have empathy, but that
Mhm.
empathy, to some degree, is sabotaging us because
Yep.
we're owning it all. We're owning it too much. Is that kind of what you're
Mhm.
saying?
Yeah, and
Wow.
it becomes a cycle of a savior complex.
Yep.
And I see that a lot with children or adults. They were children, but adults who grew up with narcissistic parents have this savior complex where they feel they're truly empathetic. And that's why the relationship worked out and the narcissistic parent didn't devour them alive. The reason why that child survived was because of that empathy, but now they're out to save the world. And in that world, they are self-sacrificing. So if I had a 5-year-old, I mean I have a 6-year-old, but if I was in your shoes for a minute, I would tell my son that yeah, it's okay not to share your toys sometimes, right? That's compassionate. Being
Hmm.
empathetic would be, oh, we have to share our toys because Johnny's going to feel bad if we don't share our toys, right? So
That's where
what
my
does
wife
that do
comes
to
in.
well,
She's
what does
good at
that
that
do
part
to
of
our
it.
feelings? It's
Yeah.
like, okay, so my feelings take a back burner to Johnny's feelings now, which sometimes, and here's the fine line, we have to do. Otherwise, we're completely selfish. But at that moment, the child can't um it we you don't have that logical thinking until way later. I would say almost 10 years old. So when we're constantly telling, imagine for 10 years, Johnny's feelings comes first, Johnny's feelings come first, that kind of puts us in this notion of like other people's feelings are more important than mine. And when we have compassion, right? We can teach our son that like, hey, Johnny's feeling a little sad right now because you're not sharing your toy. It's totally fine not to share your toy. But after you're done playing with it, can you hand it to Johnny? Right? Compassion. Your
Good.
feelings matter. You can recognize that another person's feelings are hurt, and then we can help mitigate that after your cup is full. And that's so important for parents because we always dump, 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 dump. Our cup is empty, right? And then we're
Hmm.
expected to be, regulated, trigger free, yell free parents. And we haven't
Right.
slept in 7 years.
Yeah. I am of the belief, and my wife is too. And I think the only way to truly change the world is to be a better you. And if
100%.
if you can be a better you, then
Hmm.
everything you do is going to be benefit from that. Your relationships, you're a better husband, you're a better father, you're a better brother, you're a better citizen, you're a better that.
Yep.
And I used to tell students that all the time, just, go change the world. And what I mean by that is just love yourself and put that out in the world because
100%.
that's all you can control.
Hmm. Yep.
Love this conversation so much. There's a couple things I wanted to talk about. Um, there's something you wrote. There's something in your content that hit me really hard, and I don't know why I want to bring it up, but I'm going to bring it up because I mean I get it. It's plain as day. But I have anxiety. I have childhood trauma. I've worked through it. I've been through a lot. I've had much adversity in my life, and one of the things that I never talk about, but I think about, is this that you wrote. And I don't know where you got it. Trauma is not your fault. How you treat others because of it is.
Hmm.
You wrote that somewhere in your content.
Hmm.
And that's what I think about all the time. Um,
Hmm.
because I can think about how ill-equipped I was over the years to be a friend, a boyfriend, a husband, and I'm always trying to like navigate that in my life when
Hmm.
I think back. I don't want to
Hmm.
beat myself up over it,
Hmm.
but I find myself, if somebody breaks up a marriage, right? If I'm with somebody, and perfect example is with a couple years ago, I was with a guy, I was an acquaintance. He was devastated. His wife left him and she was having all these issues. And I couldn't help but advocate for her. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like to go
Mm-hmm.
to say, man, like, because he got into the fact that she had a tough childhood and all these things. And I just felt that so much, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I just wanted to share that with you. I don't know if I'm asking you
Yeah.
even to say anything. Some of like that part of your content just hit me like a ton of bricks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where self-compassion and identity really come in. And to have this identity kind of fulfilled within you, you not only have to incorporate the light, you have to incorporate the shadow. When we incorporate both, like yin and yang, we come together and we are a fulfilled being. Compassion for ourselves means that version of myself had no idea what they were doing. This version of myself does. And I can go back and forgive that version. And that means that this version doesn't hurt people, right? Doesn't do the things that I'm aware of. Now, here's where self-esteem comes in. If you do make the same mistakes, right, with the knowledge that you have now, that is how your self-esteem lowers. When you have knowledge of something that you know that you're doing wrong, right? Like, for example, in my mind, I know that it's wrong to steal, right? When I was a kid, I didn't know that it was wrong because I was in survival mode and, I needed bread or I needed tampons or whatever. Tampons are expensive. People steal them all the time. That version of myself didn't know any better. This version of myself knows better and I'm in a better state. And if I go into that store now and steal the tampons, that's going to take a hit on my self-esteem. Right?
So those moments when because I do look back and forgive that person. Forgiveness to me is when I journal, it's one of the things I write every day.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive. I just think it's super important, but mostly it's about forgiving myself.
Right.
And because I know that's so important. And it's also knowing that I often think about what other people who may have done me wrong, it allows me to forgive them. Like what I just talked about. Maybe I go, this
Mm-hmm.
is the best they could do at that time.
Right.
Still hurt, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it is the best
Right.
they could do. Yeah. So what do I do then? What does a person do when they're in that moment? And I'm sitting there thinking of my life right now is amazing. I have an amazing family. I'm the most comfortable I've ever been in my own skin. I literally want to be an absolute light in the world. That's my whole my whole being is just to make sure that anyone who's in my presence is filled with light, right? And sometimes I feel like a fraud because of that. You know what I mean? Because I think back to the guy who hurt all these people.
Yeah.
Um, how do I how does a person when they're in that moment, what do? You just own it
No,
and
you have to
remember that's who you
integrate.
were and move forward?
No, you don't. You haven't integrated that mic. That mic is so far away from your soul. You have to put that mic inside your soul, not look at it from an arm's length, not, keep him at a distance. You have to actually incorporate him. And what I mean by that is when it comes up, for example, I don't feel like being the light in the world today, right? I'm waking up and I'm having a bad day. That's going to trigger you, the old Mike, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you start feeling like a fraud because you haven't incorporated that old Mike and you haven't given yourself the compassion and the grace. So when
Got it.
you incorporate that old Mike and you wake up and you're like, "Oh God, I feel crappy today." Do I have every reason to not feel crappy? Yeah, but I do. And then you wake up and you're like, okay, well, what am I going to do about this? Right? I feel crappy. That's okay. I'm allowed to feel crappy. Let me sit in my shit for a minute. Can I swear on here?
You
Sorry.
just did. It's okay.
Okay. I don't know I don't know if it's going to be 12-year-olds listening. So,
No, that's not my intended audience, but
okay. So let me just sit
it's
in
my
this.
audience is those people who work with young people. So
Got it. So let me sit in this for a minute and see how that feels. Where does it resonate in my body? Right? What are some emotions that I haven't felt with that old Mike that are still not really jiving with me? Right? Only then can we start to incorporate that version and this version like yin and yang in our soul. When you have a bad day and you don't feel like I shouldn't be feeling like this because my life is great. Because then you're just beating that old Mike up, right?
mm-hmm.
And that's
and,
where the
and
imposter comes in.
and that's the thing. I guess that's the reason I'm asking you about it, is because I think it's when you say I don't know what it means to integrate that mic, right? Like that's what I'm struggling with. So I guess it's like this. What I think about often is I love who I am today. And I wouldn't trade any of the pain, the neglect, the none of it, because it made me who I am today. Right.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, like how do I live in the present like I try to do every day when I meditate,
Mm-hmm.
but still integrate that mic is the little balancing act I'm trying to figure out right now.
Yeah. Well, those triggers that are coming up, that's the old Mike. So when you push down the triggers and don't acknowledge them and don't validate them, that's you keeping that mic at an arm's distance.
Okay.
When you have a trigger, let's say you wake up in the morning and you're not feeling good, or your body doesn't feel good, or your son is having a meltdown, right? That's a big thing with parents. Your
Mm-hmm.
son is having a meltdown, and all of a sudden you go back into childhood, and it's you having that meltdown, not your child, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's that version of Mike having a meltdown, and now all of a sudden you feel the same way as your parents did at that moment. And what that does is it goes into the guilt and it goes into the shame of being associated with your parents.
Interesting.
Now, when we do that, we keep all of that at an arm's distance. When we integrate that and say, okay, mom and dad, thanks for teaching me this lesson. I'm not you, but thank you for letting me see this situation in a different lens. Obviously, this is after you've paused and you've gone into the room and like screamed your head off or done whatever you need to do to come back into your prefrontal cortex. But that's essentially what's going on with the trigger. You're keeping that old Mike, you're keeping mom and dad, you're keeping all those things from being integrated. And then it becomes like this inner critic in your mind. And it begins to stew and it begins to
Right.
ruminate and it begins to get bigger and bigger when it doesn't have to be, when you could just name it, right? When we name our fear, we can conquer it because we can
Yeah.
name it.
So that's like when you say name the fear, it's like naming the trigger, right? So
Right.
when I'm having an issue with my family, like I find myself being very honest, like with my wife, and when something goes down, I first of all I get quiet for a while because I need to think about it up here, and
Mm-hmm.
then I'm able to have a conversation and say, "Look, you understand what just happened
Mm-hmm.
made me feel this way because of this, and this from years ago."
Right.
Okay. I love this conversation so much. I really do. It just can help so many people, and
Yeah.
I hope people get to listen to this and hear what you have to say because you're so eloquently saying it and it's just
Thank
so
you.
genuine and I love it. But I
Thanks so
have to
much.
move on to one more thing before we get to my final question.
Sure.
And this is another big part of this whole journey for me is how does how do you protect yourself when you're sitting and when you are talking to somebody about their childhood trauma? How do you protect your own your own yourself. How do you take care of yourself? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the other thing I learned about being when I was in schools was, or in this reflection upon being in schools was, I was in it, and I
Mm-hmm.
never thought of my own child, inner
Right.
child. So
Yep.
how does that affect you? What do you do?
So a lot of grounding, being in nature helps a lot. Even now that it's winter in Chicago, it's freezing. Just going outside and touching some snow, or just quickly touching a tree, or just even going outside and taking a deep breath of fresh air helps recenter me. I also very much limit my schedule. I only take 2 clients a day. The reason why I take 2 clients a day is because we don't have time limits in our sessions. So, for example, a session can go for 2 hours. And the reason why I decided to do it that way is because when I was doing therapy, I hated getting so deep into something. And
Hmm.
we're right on the cusp of figuring something out. You could feel it. And it's like, oh, time's up. Sorry, see you next week. And then that's gone. Right.
Yeah.
And I hated that. And I remember when I first started offering coaching, that was one of the things that people were really attracted to. This no limit. Hmm.
I was going to say, like, it's so interesting you say that, because the big thing for me when I was in that seat, in that therapist's office, is it just that moment where they say, "Oh, time's up." You're just it's not even just being close to a
Yes.
breakthrough. It's being reminded that you're in a transactional relationship, and there's no, like, it takes the humanity out of it
You're
to me. Like,
abandoned all over again.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because
That's
what
yes.
happens with a therapist, and what should happen with a therapist or a coach and the client and the patient, is some kind of safety. If you don't develop that safety within each other, the relationship doesn't work. And when you feel safe with somebody and they're telling you, like, time's up, when you're right on the cusp of something big, your body goes back into a trigger. Your body goes back into that abandonment wound. And, a lot of my clients who do have abandonment issues from developmental trauma, that's why therapy failed them.
Interesting.
That's one of the biggest reasons why, is because they felt abandoned all over again. When we do trauma work together, at the end of my sessions, we always make sure that we're in a calm and safe space to leave. And then I don't force my clients to be weekly clients or monthly clients. They can leave appointments as often as they'd like, because when we get so deep into something, it takes a while to unravel. I also don't work with clients more than 6 months, because by the time that you've seen me for 6 months, I've given you all the tools, and now it's time for you to integrate them.
Yeah.
And so these are kind of like the resources that I've used to kind of protect not only myself, but also have it be the best cost to benefit ratio.
Hmm.
So I only take 2 clients a day, no time limit. I ground as much as I can, compassion versus empathy, and really trying to have that safe space for my client, and making it clear, when I can't help you, I can't help you, right? I don't deal with clients who are suicidal, and I don't deal with really like schizophrenia who that is on medication, um, borderline personality disorder. I do deal with depression and anxiety. Those are common things that I do deal with, but some of the bigger mental illnesses need a professional who has a bigger container, right? Those kind of mental illnesses need something more than just a Zoom transaction, unfortunately.
That's amazing. How long have you been doing this work?
I want to say like 4 or 5 years professionally, but I feel like I've been doing it my whole life.
Yeah.
I come from a background of emotionally immature parents, which I think most of us do. My mom had me at
Mm-hmm.
19. Her prefrontal cortex wasn't even formed.
Mm-hmm.
So, but she was married, and her and my dad were married for a year before they had me. So that's just the way it was done back then. And, you know, growing up with emotionally immature parents, you have to be mature at a very
Mm-hmm.
young age. And I just felt always being like the friend that everybody kind of went to for advice my whole life. And then I was a gate agent at American Airlines for a while. And I loved that job. And you work a gate with a different person your whole shift. And so every time we would finish a flight, like it would be therapy hour. And so a lot of people would be like, "Hey, can you put me on a flight with Anna?" And so I started to get to a point where I had to charge. So I charged like $20. I charged something minimal because it was a transaction that needed a monetary gain in order for the other person to take the information and like
Right.
run with it, because if it's free, they're not going to value it. So I would charge something super minimal, but then I had one of my clients was like, no, you cannot charge $20 because you've helped me way more than one of my therapists. And she was in therapy for 6 years at the time. So I had to and then the pandemic hit. So I stopped working at American Airlines and just decided to be a stay-at-home mom. And then that's when I started my herbal journey, and I started a tea company. But then I kind of got pulled back into coaching when one of my distant relatives was having a like meltdown because of everything happening, and she kind of pulled me back into that realm. And then slowly it started just word of mouth, and now it's here. you know,
Awesome.
yeah.
I think it's wonderful the work that you do. And, you talked about purpose, and, that's, you found your purpose. And, I love that. So I'm going to end. I
Thank you
want
so
to ask
much.
you, I want to give you some context on this idea of what you would say to your 12-year-old self. And then I'm going to let you
Hmm.
answer the question.
Sure.
When about, I don't know, 4 months ago or so, I was online, social media, I saw a meme. And the meme was very simple, a reel. It just, music, there's music playing in the background. And my
Hmm.
therapist said, picture yourself outside your childhood bedrooms, your 12-year-old self's
Yeah.
bedroom. What would you, and I couldn't finish it. Like I didn't finish
Hmm.
reading. It hit me, and I got so emotional. And
Hmm.
I, thinking back now, 12 was a very tumultuous time for me in my life. And like I could have had no divorce parents. I could have had no this, no that. 12 is hard regardless, but, and it started this whole journey for me where
Yeah.
I started reflecting on what it was like to deal with 12-year-olds in my job and what it was doing, all the things we talked about.
Right.
So I put together this little project to talk to people like you so I could say, tell me what you would say to that 12-year-old you. And also afterwards, we want to leave the audience with some really feasible, actionable things. If they're working with young people in any capacity, whether they're a parent, a coach, a teacher, a nurse, whatever, what can they do for a child to help them begin healing earlier than you and I did? So what
Yeah.
would you say to your 12-year-old self, you think?
Such a powerful question. And I think that there's so many different answers because every child is so individual and their needs are so individual. But I think asking, like, what do you need me to say right now? You know, what container do you need for your emotions? Do you need somebody to hold you? Do you need somebody to talk to, just to listen? You know, really giving back that agency to that 12-year-old because they don't have it. That's why
So
they're
what
in
would you
that
answer to that
position.
though? What would 12-year-old Anna answer to that question?
12-year-old Anna would just say that I need somebody to listen to. I at 12 years old, I needed somebody to just listen and not do anything, right? Not go to child protective services because that was a big thing for me. Like I was so worried to tell somebody like a teacher that I felt safe with, or a neighbor or whatever, somebody that I felt safe with. I didn't want the repercussions of getting taken from my home because I wasn't being physically, sure, there was spanking and there was slapping, but comparatively to the foster care, system, I
Mm-hmm.
no, I came from a great home. So I just wanted somebody to listen without taking any action, without wanting to help. And I think that that was such a thing that was missing in my life at 12 years old, somebody that I could just open up to without any agency.
Interesting. Yeah, man. It's I don't envy young kids. I don't. I still have this thing where I still see myself in young when I it's one of those things I work on. I just always assume that they're having a terrible time. And it's a
Yeah.
shame, but that's just what it's my experience. All right, so what would Ana Gersch, parent, yoga person, trauma coach, what are some, or even one, very feasible, actionable thing people that work with young people can do to help them start healing now?
Um, Really to explain what feeling emotions means without hurting somebody else. A lot of the times, young people think that feeling emotions means that we need to do something about those emotions. Like, I feel angry, I need to punch you in the face, or I'm feeling sad, I need to go and, cut myself, or I need to go and binge eat, or, I'm feeling excited, so that makes me anxious. Explaining emotions and giving them kind of a understanding that emotions are just energy in motion and it will pass. Feel it in your body and then let it go, release it in whatever way. Like if you're angry, stomp your feet or clench your fists and, give them some real tools. Gosh, I think that that would be half the battle.
No, that's wonderful because that's something I still have a conversation with adults now, where we
Yeah,
talk about, especially, and I'm a man, so but especially like men when it comes to emotion and things like that,
right.
it's foreign to us, and
Hmm.
a lot of us believe that we have to do something besides sit there and just be it, right? Like
Hmm.
sometimes you're just sad. You
Yeah.
might have had a death in the family. And it might be you're sad. You have
Hmm.
to just let that wash over you
Hmm.
because you're not going to feel the other things without it. And
Hmm.
those are the conversations I find myself having now. So
Hmm.
I love that because it's just a great answer. So
Thank you.
and I really appreciate you joining me today. I love this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it half as much as I did.
Thanks, Mike. No, I really
It,
did. It was a great conversation. Thank you.
I loved it. All right. Thank you so much and have a great day.
You too, Mike. Take care.
Special thanks to my guest today, Ana Gersch. You could find links to her socials and to our website in our show notes. Please don't forget to subscribe or rate the show or leave a comment or a review. Share with your friends. Anything that can get us to more ears would be greatly appreciated. Your 12-Year-Old Self is a Fairmount Media production, and it's hosted, written, and produced by me, Mike Nicholson. Questions, comments, guest suggestions can be emailed to your12yearoldself@gmail.com. That's your 12-year-old self with the number 12 at gmail.com. The theme song is Never a Worthless Moon by Yawns. Logo design by Rose Bear Arts. Digital marketing consulting by Krista Lemon. Social media consulting by Jessica Hawk. Special thanks to Ron Cornwall and Sarah Finney. And my profound gratitude goes out to my wife, Courtney,